here, and the halachas over here, they're going to deal with what constitutes a joint space and not. So what we've been dealing with up until now was courtyards. Basically, most of the usage of people were immediately in the front courtyard of their homes. That's where they wash dishes and wash laundry or whatever it may be. So they baked. So that was a typical functioning space that was shared by all of the inhabitants of the courtyard. The roofs, which were not made, which were not slanted, which were flat, were less often used. Also, they had these storage areas, and we saw a machlokas about this before. This idea of that up until now we saw that there was a requirement that one courtyard make an eruv together with another courtyard. Is actually going to be a machlokas in our Mishnah of whether or not we say all the courtyards and all the roofs and all of the karfes, which are the storage areas, count as one area, or they count as separate areas, but they all count as a joint area. So all the roofs are one, and all of the courtyards are one, and all of the karfes are one. Or do we say, no, every individual group is their space? Okay? So we're going to start the new parak on the ninth parak, 59a, a few lines in. This is going to be the new parak. Okay. So kol gagos ha'ir, the entire city worth of roofs count as one halachic space, and as long as you can get from one to the other, any items that were on the roof prior to the onset of Shabbos, you can carry from one roof to another roof, no problem. As long as there is not a 10 tefachim drop between one roof and the other, then they count as one space. But if there's a 10 tefachim difference between one roof and the other, which would be, let's say, about 30, 40 inches, so that would count as a separate space. Different Rabbi Meir, that's Rabbi Meir's opinion. The Chachamim say no, each and every roof is a different space. As we will see, the idea is that they hold that since the dwelling beneath is separate from the other dwelling, and they have a separate owner and separate rights, so too above they are separate in rights, and you cannot carry from one to the other. And Rabbi Shimon says, of course, this is all if they didn't make an eruv. If they made an eruv, then you can carry on the roof. Rabbi Shimon says, not only are all the roofs one, and as we explained, then therefore that opinion would say all the chatzeros are one, or the chatzeros are one, and all of the karfefs, the karfifos are one. He says, Rabbi Shimon takes it one step further, and he says, no, not only are all the roofs one, but the roofs and the karfefs are also considered one. So if you had something left in your storage area, you can carry it onto the roof. If you had something on the roof area, you can carry it to the neighbor's roof, or to the neighbor's karfef, or to the neighbor's chatzer. It's all one halachic space. Echad gagos, the roofs, echad chatzeros, and the karfefs, and the courtyards, echad karfifos, and the karfefs. Any vessels that were in the courtyard before Shabbos do not need an eruv with a neighbor in order to carry it to the neighboring courtyard, or to the neighbor's roof, or to the neighbor's karfef. All the discussion beforehand that we had, that discussed whether or not you need an eruv with your neighbor's courtyard and your courtyard, and if you'd had a wall between, you can't make an eruv together. That's all about how vessels that were in the house on Shabbos. So you made an eruv, you brought it into your courtyard, you cannot bring it into the neighbor's courtyard for Shabbos. But vessels that were in the house at the onset of Shabbos, those may not be carried from the house into the courtyard, into your own courtyard, and then subsequently onto the neighbor's roof, or onto the neighbor's courtyard, into the neighbor's courtyard, or into their storage area. That's going to be prohibited. So the Gemara is going to explain. Yosef Abaye bar Ovim, or Chanina bar Ovin, but Yosef Abaye Gabayu. So Abaye bar Ovin and Chanina bar Ovin were sitting, and Abaye was with them. V'Yasir Kamri, they said over Bishlam Rabbanan. So I understand the reasoning of the Rabbanan who say you can't carry from your courtyard to the neighbor's courtyard, from your roof to the neighbor's roof. Savri, Kashem Shadiram Chalukah Lamata, Kachdiram Chalukah Lamala, they say the Chachamim are of the opinion that just as in the house itself it is separate dwellings, so too in regards to the roof, it's separate dwellings. Ella Rabbi Meir, Micah Savar, but Rabbi Meir, what opinion does he have? If he says that just as the house is separate, so too the roof area is separate. So why does he say all the roofs of the city are one halacha and you can carry from one roof to the other? And if he says that they are not separate and it's all one, and that's why you're allowed to carry a vessel that was on the roof, on my roof, I could carry onto your roof on Shabbos. Because he says everything that's above 10 tefachim from the ground, which the roof would be, is going to have one halachic space. So then why is there a distinction if the roof is more than 10 tefachim high or low from the other roof? Who cares? It's all one halachic space because it's above 10 tefachim over the ground. So that was their question. Do we say that since the dwellings beneath separate them, the roof is also separate? Then why does he say you can carry from one roof to the other? And if he says that the dwellings beneath do not separate them, so who cares that one is higher than the other? It's all one halachic space. Amalu Abayas said, I see that you've never heard this teaching, this teaching of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Adimi, that he explained Rabbi Meir by saying, Rabbi Meir would say this halacha, wherever you have two halachic domains that have the same category, meaning if you have in your private domain enclosed with fences, you have another private domain, meaning that it's 10 tefachim high, 4x4. So it acquires its own halachic space. But they both are going to be private domain. The halacha is that even though their classification is the same, but their boundaries are different, so each one has its independent classification of a private domain. And so, for instance, the case we just said, a pillar in the middle of a private domain that's 10 tefachim high, 4 tefachim wide, which gives it its own halachic space of a private domain. You're not allowed to take packages off your shoulder and rest it on that pillar. Why? Because we're afraid something similar like that will happen in a public domain, where you have a pillar in the middle of a public domain, and you're going to rest your weirs from your shoulder on there, and that pillar in the public domain is actually going to be private because it's 10 tefachim high, 4 tefachim wide, that classifies it as its own private domain. And you're going to take the items that you're carrying in the public domain and put it down there, and that's going to be a Torah prohibition. Hachanami, and therefore the same applies to these roofs. So the roof also, it has nothing to do with the separation of the roofs. You're right that each roof is going to count as the same domain as the roof next to it, and therefore technically you should be allowed to carry from one roof to the other regardless of its height difference. However, since one roof is 10 tefachim higher or lower than the other, and what's going to end up happening is you're going to see it as a 10 tefachim pillar in the middle of another domain. And if that was in a public place, that would be a Torah prohibition. So the Chachamim made a general prohibition everywhere, that if you have, even within the same classification of domain, like a roof, which they're both Rishus HaYachid, they're both private domain. Since if it were in a public domain, it would be a problem. Even in a private domain, Rabbi Meir does not allow to carry something from one to the other because you may end up doing the same in a public domain. Savar Mina. So he wanted to say, based on this, even if you have in your front yard, which were typical things that people will have in their chutzner, a machteshes, a grinding crusher, and a gigas, a barrel, which these would be 10 tefachim high, 4 tefachim wide, and define their own space. No, Rameir only said this for a pillar or for the base of a mill, which the base of the mill was also it was called the amma of the mill because it was an amma wide, generally, which is more than 4 tefachim, and so it get its own classification. Since they have a set place, but a barrel doesn't have a set place, and so that doesn't count. And similarly, the machteshes, a grinder or a pestle and mortar, those don't have set places, and therefore those would move. And there, even though it is more than 10 tefachim high, it defines its own space. You're allowed to put some stuff onto it, would not be a problem. The only problem really is in a public something that's permanent, because that could be in a public domain and end up causing a Torah prohibition. So Gemara says, okay, so what you just told us is that if you have something that fits the criteria of its own rishus, its own space, that you're not allowed to carry through there, on there. But that's not halacha b'arei kosel shebei shtei chatzeros. What about the wall between two courtyards, which is going to be 4 tefachim wide and 10 tefachim high? The kavua, and that's as permanent as you can get. It's a fence between the two courtyards. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda said, that if you would understand the reasoning of Rabbi Meir well, then we would know that Rabbi Meir didn't only say that you can carry from one roof to another, but he also holds you can carry from one courtyard to another. Because what Rabbi Meir is saying is that all roofs count as one halachic space, and all courtyards count as one halachic space, and all karfifos, all storage areas, count as halachic space. And therefore, gagen rishus la'atzman, all the roofs are their own halachic space, and you can carry from one to the other for any item that was on the roof before Shabbos, at the onset of Shabbos. And chatzeros rishus la'atzman, and all courtyards will have the same halacha as well. You can carry from one courtyard to the other, even if you didn't make an eruv between the courtyards. You can carry from one courtyard to the other for any items that at the onset of Shabbos were in the courtyard. And the same for karfifos. Rishus la'atzman, you can carry any item that was in a storage area to other storage areas of your neighbors and your friends, as long as it was in the storage area at the onset of Shabbos. Now, how are you going to carry from one courtyard to the other if you tell me that the wall between invalidates the carrying? My love, the Charlotte Tuli Derech Kaisa, wouldn't you say that you're allowed to put it on the wall and over the wall, but the wall itself is its own domain? And you just told me, according to Rabbi Meir, something that its own domain you're not allowed to carry. And that's the reason why the roof that's 10 tefachim high is going to be an invalidation. So the wall here also is 10 tefachim high. It invalidates the space. You can't carry from one to the other. Amar Ravuna bar Yehuda, Ravuna bar Yehuda said, no, you misunderstood. Of course, you can't carry over the 10 tefachim wall, but you can carry through the window through the 10 tefachim wall. But we're not talking about over the wall, because indeed that's prohibited, but rather through the doors and through the windows, which would allow you to make an eruv with the neighbor. But even if you didn't make an eruv together with the neighboring courtyard, you're allowed to carry items that were in the courtyard through to the next neighbor. The eruv would only help you that in as much as you're allowed to carry from your house to your neighbor's courtyard. But items that were in the courtyard itself, you can carry from one courtyard to the other through the doors and through the windows, but not over the 10 tefachim wall. According to Rabbi Meir, from one courtyard to the other, even if you didn't make an eruv. The next part of the Gemara is going to say that the Chachamim disagree. The Chachamim say, Kol echad ve'echad reshus b'fnei atzma. Each one alone is a reshus b'fnei atzma, its own domain. Itmar, it is said, Rav Amar ein metalton bo'el b'dalat amas. Rav says that on this roof, that according to the Chachamim, you're only allowed to carry in your own space. Not only can you only carry in your own space, but you only can carry within the 4 amos of where it was. The space that it had for Shabbos defines its space, and you can't carry it to the neighbor. Not only can you not carry it to the neighbor, but you can't carry even in your own roof, on your own roof, more than 4 amos. And Shmuel says that you're allowed to carry in the entire space. And here we're going to get into a concept that we've seen before, the halacha of good asik mechitzta. That good, we stretch up the mechitza, the barrier, and it counts at the wall below counts as a wall above as well. And the question is going to be, this idea that we say good asik mechitzta, we understand when you have a wall that's visible all around, meaning the outer walls of these houses go all the way up, and since they go up to the roof, they also go above the roof, and we halachically consider it a continuous wall above the roof. And so when you have items on the roof here, it counts as if the outside wall of the house goes up along into the air above. That's a concept of good asik mechitzta. We say that the mechitza, the barrier, goes up above, and we say it for a pillar in the middle of a public domain, that the 10 tefachim wall goes up, and it's as if there's the wall surrounding the flat surface above the pillar. And this is true for the roof over a house. The question that Shmuel and Rav are now going to address is what happens if you cannot actually see the wall. So as you can see over here in this image, there's a gap between these two houses. And so we say good asik mechitzta, the person standing on the roof on either one of these roofs, if he looks down at his toes, and if he's at the edge, he will see a wall beneath it. That wall is stretched up in front of him, and that would count as the barrier between the two domains. However, what happens if the houses are actually connected? There is no wall that you can see. There is a wall beneath. There actually is a wall beneath them, but you cannot see it from the roof because as far as the roof goes, it's all connected. Do we still say good asik mechitzta? Do we say that the wall beneath continuously goes up through the roof and it's a virtual wall between the two houses, and the roofs and this way the roof is also separated? Or do we say, no, since you cannot see it, it does not count as good asik mechitzta? And this is a mechitza hanikaras be'inan. Do we say that you have to need to recognize them or not? So the Gemara says, b'mechitzas hanikaros, in the first case where you can actually tell that there's a wall because there's a gap, and so you see the wall beneath you. Kuli alma lepligi. Everybody agrees that each roof is considered its own space, and there's a wall around it, and therefore you can carry the entirety of the roof, both according to Rav and according to Shmuel. However, where's the machlokes? Ki pligi the mechitza shein and nikaras. In such a case where the house is actually connected, so you cannot see the wall below, and now we want to say that the wall below stretches above and creates a virtual wall. Rav says you can only carry 4 amos because we do not count it as a virtual wall. He does not say such a non-recognizable wall counts as a mechitza. Shmuel says you may carry in your entire space. Why? We say that the mechitza, the wall below, comes up, virtually stretches up, and it counts as a separation. And now your entire roof is your own space, and so you can carry in there with walls because it's as if it has walls. So Tanan, so we have in our Mishnah, the Chachamim say, everybody, each one is its own space. And we understand that to mean, and each person can carry in the entirety of his roof. Right? So that seems to prove Shmuel's idea. So the Gemara says, Bishlam and Shmuel nicha. So according to Shmuel, it makes sense. Ela l'Rav, but according to Rav, kasha. According to Rav, that's a question. Amri be Rav, Mishmei the Rav, and the Academy of Rav. They explain in the name of Rav, Shalei talta but Beis Amos begagzeh, Beis Amos begagzeh. Of course, it doesn't mean that you can carry in the entirety of your space. What it means is if you had an item on your roof within 2 amos, 2 full amos within the end of your space, and then there's the virtual wall that Rav says we cannot recognize and doesn't count, but Rav said you're allowed to carry 4 amos. So perhaps you can even carry 4 amos into the neighbor's space. And that he says you cannot do, because you have the 2 amos of your own space, and you cannot move it into the 2 amos of the neighbor's space, because that's already a separate space, even though that the wall is not recognizable, but it is the end of your space, and you're not allowed to carry it to the next one. And that's what it means. Each property below defines the space above as a separate space. But of course, in your own space, Rav is going to say you cannot carry more than 4 amos. So when it says, but Rabbi Elazar said, when we were in Bavel, Rav, we said in the Academy of Rav Mishmei, the Rav, in the name of Rav Amru, that you can only carry within the 4 amos. And in the Academy of Shmuel, they said you can carry the entirety of your roof. What does it mean you only have your own roof? Wouldn't you say that you can carry the entirety of the roof? So Gemara says, yeah, of course, but that's not a question, because that's exactly what we just explained as well in our Mishnah. Is any stronger than our Mishnah? We explained that according to Rav, what it means is you can carry 4 amos, but only to the end of your property and the end of your roof, even though that it's connected to the next roof, to the neighbor's roof. But since it's the end of your property below, you cannot carry into the neighbor's property, even if it's within the 4 amos. And therefore, if your item that you wanted to move to the other side was within the 2 amos of the end of your property, you cannot move it the additional 2 into the next neighbor. So that's the way they explain this. And now Rav Yosef, who, as you remember, got ill and had forgotten his learning. He forgot a lot of the teachings that he had. So he challenged. He challenged his students Abaye and said, "I don't remember ever teaching this." Amar Rav Yosef leShamila Hashmaita. I never heard this teaching. No, you did teach it to us, and I'll give you the scenario for which you taught it to us. You said it about this idea. Now, in order to understand the next section, we have to understand that if you had a larger house with the roof, let's say it's 10 amos by 10 amos, and the smaller house where the roof is narrower, so it's only 8 amos by 10 amos. So that roof is going to have it's sort of going to look like a bottleneck, and at that bottleneck, what's going to happen is that you're going to have walls that from the perspective of the inside of the larger space, it looks like there are 4 walls surrounding it with a doorway or with an opening to the smaller roof. However, from the perspective of the smaller roof, where if you were standing on the smaller roof looking towards the larger one, you're not going to see any 4th wall. You're only going to see the 3 walls and a complete opening on the other side. And in that case, what's going to end up happening is that the people that are in the larger roof actually are fully enclosed, whereas the people or the items in the smaller roof are not fully enclosed because they have a complete breach on one side. And since they are not made in Eruv together, they cannot carry from one to the other. So that would prohibit the smaller roof. That's what scenario Rav Yosef was talking about to his students that he taught this teaching about. That's what Abai is going to tell him. You said it to us about this halacha. A larger roof that's adjacent to a smaller roof. Hagadol muter. So the larger roof is allowed to carry because they have a 4-wall enclosure. Because even on the side open to the smaller roof, there's going to be, because it's narrower, there's going to be a wall up until that area where it's open to the smaller roof. And that's called gifufi, short walls. So Hagadol muter, but the smaller roof area is going to be prohibited to carry because it is completely open on one side. Only has 3 walls, and one side is open to a neighboring space that it's not allowed to carry to. Va'amris lan Allah, and about that idea you told us, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mashmuel, that in the name of Shmuel it says Leishanu al sheyesh diurim al zeh v'diurim al zeh. It's only if people actually use the rooftops. So therefore, they walk between the small roof and the larger roof, and since they do so, you can't have a virtual wall between them. You can't say the wall between the two structures, between the two houses, virtually comes up and stretches above and divides the two roofs, because people are walking back and forth all the time. The Havala hadekatan mechitzin addresses, because this way the wall between the smaller roof going into the larger roof is a wall that is trampled on, meaning it's a virtual wall that people are constantly breaking through and therefore can't count as a halachic wall. But if both roofs don't have typical usage, so then the halacha is going to be that the walls from the smaller roof are also going to count, because you have a virtual wall between the large house and the small house, which comes up. Well, you have an actual wall between the large house and the small house, which virtually comes up and separates the larger roof from the smaller roof, and so you can carry in each one of them. Shnei matarma, therefore you're allowed to carry in the small roof as well. Even though we just told you can't carry in the small roof because on the fourth wall is completely open. It's missing between the smaller area and the larger area. Actually, since Shmuel says that the wall below can become a virtual wall above, even though you can't recognize the wall, you don't need a mechitza and keres, a recognizable wall, and yet you're going to say good asik mechitza, that the wall will stretch upward. So therefore, if we were looking at it from the perspective of the small roof, all the inhabitants of the small house can go onto the roof and carry within there, because it actually has four walls, 3 standing walls and 1 virtual wall, halachic wall. Amalei. So Rav Yosef challenged Abai, said, I didn't say that. What I had said to you was, it's only if there are actual walls on both of them. Therefore, the gadol mishteri begefufi, the larger wall has large area and it has 4 walls, because it has the small walls on that fourth wall between the larger and smaller. Since the smaller the roof is narrower, it actually has a fourth wall on both sides. The katan nifratz b'malay. However, the smaller roof, since it's completely open on one side, is not going to be not going to have valid walls, and therefore they can't carry. But if they don't have any barriers, they don't have any walls, then you're not allowed. Then it's not going to be. Then it's not going to be permissible. If they don't have walls, then you're not allowed to carry. Why? Shnei asur. Both are going to be prohibited. So the Gemara says, why? But you told, Abaye said to Rav Yosef, but you told us the idea is that that something about the people that dwelling on the roof are what ruin it. So he said, or he responded, if I said something about people living on the roof, this is what I would have said to you. It's only if the walls, meaning the wall on the roof, right? A roof is dangerous. You can't just live on the roof because you can fall off. So it depends what kind of walls you have there. If you just have a dingy, a weak barrier as a fence at the end of your roof, so that's not going to count. If you have a proper wall that you can actually live on the roof, that's going to count. And this is what I would have said to you. It's only if they both have a solid roof on each one, a solid wall on the roof of each one, where since both are livable space, so there we're going to say that it counts as a valid roof, a valid space. The gadol mishteri begefufi dekata, that the small one is, the large one is allowed to carry on account of that it is open to the it has walls on the fourth side. On the side that it's open to the small roof, it has walls, and therefore you can carry within that space. And the cotton nifritz b'malay, and the small one is going to be completely open as a barrier on the fourth wall is completely open to the larger courtyard, and therefore they can't carry in there because they don't have a fourth wall, as we said before. So he said the idea, if I said something about in the living space, that's what I meant. Not that people are actually living there, but that the walls are livable. However, he makes a distinction. However, if the larger roof area has a proper wall that you can actually live up there and is safe. However, the smaller roof, the smaller house, that doesn't have a safe and livable wall. It has these just like a temporary kind of protection. But the smaller one does not have a safe and livable boundary. Then, since the smaller one doesn't have a safe living area, so they've shown the inhabitants that live below in the smaller house have shown that they have no intention of using the upper area, their roof, for livable space. So then it all belongs to the upper, to the people that live in the larger space, because they can say, look, you don't have no intent to use the roof, and our roof is connected to your roof, so we can get to use it. My time, since they didn't make a proper protective fence around their roof, they've shown that they have no intent of living up there, and therefore the people on the larger roof can carry and use the smaller roof. Similarly to that which Rav Nachman said. Now, Rav Nachman said in the first part of our Mishnah, which we were talking about all the roofs of the city, that they are all connected and you're allowed to live there, that the halacha is if no one puts up a ladder to the roof besides for one person, that person has rights to all of the roofs. The Amar of Nachman, Asa Sulam Kavua Lagaga, he made a permanent roof, a permanent ladder to his roof, and none of the other neighbors have a ladder to their roof. So this one person is allowed to use the space and carry from one to the other on Shabbos in all of the roofs. Amar Abaya says similarly, Bona Aliyah, if the one person builds a structure, a house on the top of as another structure on the top of one of the houses. So he built himself a second story space. I'm sorry, there is no picture for it. So he built a second story space on it. He built a second story on it. And from that loft that he built on the roof, he built a little doorway to the neighbor's roof. Arba, as long as it is 4 tefachim, now he can carry on all the roofs because he has a dwelling space on the roof and he made an entrance to the other roofs and nobody else has it. So just like the ladder that since he's the only one that made a ladder, he's the only one that has the rights to the roofs on Shabbos because he showed he wants to use it as dwelling. So too, if he built a structure on top and he made an opening to the other roofs, he also has rights on Shabbos to carry there. It actually could be that sometimes making a little, making a dwelling space on the roof and then a little doorway could actually make it prohibited to carry elsewhere. What would that be the case? That he made it facing the garden of his house. The Amar, and now we go to Tzadi Amin Aleph to 90a. The Amal and Turi Tarbitza Udavida, that since he made the little opening towards his garden, he has shown that the dwelling on the roof is there as a protection, as a guard's house for the garden, and therefore he has shown that he has no use and no intention to use the rest of the roof and the roofs of the neighbors, and he cannot carry there on Shabbos. We'll stop with this, and tomorrow morning, Bez Hashem, will continue with